Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. It's your boy, the Diggity Doodah Doc, Mr. Peptoy Panther, here for another episode with the Wobbly Wild Card. We've got plenty of Kiwi sporting matters to discuss on today's episode. Pretty much headlined by some fairly interesting New Zealand Warriors news. Got a new coach for next season, Nathan Brown. Got a guy doing some stuff as well by the name of Phil Gould, and plenty to run over there. I wrote about that specifically yesterday in a Diary of a Warriors Fan entry, and then I also touched on a wider aspect of Phil Gould's role with relation to rugby league in Aotearoa and the Pacific Islands today on the Monday morning dummy half. So a lot of those ideas we'll talk about in the podcast when we get to the NZ Warriors bit. Otherwise, if you can read, and you can read pretty good, it's there for you to read as well. Also on the agenda, Sarpreet Singh's going to a new football club. We got Wellington Phoenix still in action. Plenty of footballing stuff on the Wildcards desk. Caribbean Premier League is creeping up on the radar as well, and there's a couple of interesting insights to offer with regards to the Black Caps. Well, not even Black Caps, just Kiwi cricketers involved in the Caribbean Premier League coming up in the next, maybe by the time the next episode is live. Lydia Ko finished tied for second at the Marathon LPGA Classic. So we'll touch on that to start with after we get through our intro topics. Plenty on the cards here today, Wobbly Wild Card, and how are ya?
How am I? It's fine. I got a big old blister on my left hand at the moment, which is driving me nuts because it's right just between the middle finger and the ring finger, and I can't stop from agitating it. It's bloody annoying. I got it from swinging an axe trying to take care of a tree that fell down over a fence when the big old storm happened a couple of weeks ago, and it's just been too wet to clean it up in between then and now. It's probably still a little bit too wet, but yeah. Blistered my bloody hand, and it's affected my typing while I was doing the email this morning, and I had a plaster on it, and it's now come off because of all the movement. So that's how I'm feeling at the moment. That's what's been attracting my attention for the last couple minutes, as this bloody thing dangles off, and the raw bare skin is exposed to the atmosphere. Not great, but I chucked a little Savlon on it this morning, so it should be all right.
That's how we roll. If we're not swinging the axe, we're typing on our fucking keyboards. Bit of a dichotomy
one
there.
Extreme to the other, eh?
Yeah, that's how we roll. The email is live. We sent that out this morning, so you can check that out. We got Substack links everywhere. We serve up the email Mondays and Fridays, so sign up to that for plenty of juicy bonus kind of content. Like, for example, I just dropped some Super Rugby stats and bit of background information for the likes of Fetu Douglas, the Crusaders number 8, and the Highlanders number 8 as well, Marino Mikaeli Tu'u. So just random shit that we like. That's where you get in the email. And if you do appreciate the Niche Cast and what we're doing, if you enjoy the Niche Cast, jump on Patreon and support us straight up the guts as per usual. Wildcard, I made just a grassroots update here. I made a trip to Greyland Park in Auckland, and I watched the Richmond Bulldogs, I think, take on the Mangere East Hawks. Mangere East aren't so good this year in the rugby league thing, but Richmond, reason I went to watch Richmond is because there are a couple of younger Warriors players who come from a variety of different Auckland clubs, but if you're kind of aligned with the Warriors, or if you're in the Warriors system, they want you playing Fox Memorial Premiership, so you've got to link up with one of the top clubs. And so you had Sione Mawala, young half, coming through the Warriors system. He was playing, I've said this a bunch of times, so bear with me if you've heard this before. He was the under 19 junior Kiwis half last year, and then earlier this year, he was still eligible for SG Ball, which is under 18, and then he's out there on a Saturday playing rugged footy club footy in Auckland. I think that's a important development step that a lot of people might be overlooking for young players. There, a lot of them are out there playing against men in the Auckland competition. Richmond also have Temple Kalepo, who's a very good hooker coming through the Warriors system, and Jairus Glamuzina, who caught my eye as a really ruthless, rugged middle forward. I think he played on a bit on the edge for the Richmond team as well. So just, it's actually been quite good, because usually playing hockey as you're playing football on a Saturday, that kind of ties you up and you can't get around the grounds to watch other sports. So I'm actually enjoying the freedom to go out and watch a Premier Auckland Rugby League game and see some of these dudes in action. It's quite fun.
Yeah, that is one aspect of having a summer national league that I really enjoy, is that I'm not playing a summer sport, so I can go down and if I happen to be in Auckland, for example, for a weekend, there's 3 teams that play out of Auckland, there's probably going to be at least one game I can go to, that kind of thing. Whereas, during the, I'd like to go watch a bunch of, Northern League games over the winter, but especially this season, because you got a lot of players who, haven't made the trip to Australia or whatever, or trying their luck in Europe, or some people maybe would have been, I don't know, even looking at colleges in the States or things like that. Like, you just got an unusually strong selection. Probably a couple of those teams that have merged as well affects that as well, sort of combining the old playing base. But yeah, really strong playing group in the Northern Leagues this season, same as in Central Leagues, and I'm sure it's the same down south as well. But yeah, unfortunately, a bit busy playing my own games, which is still the preferable option. But it would have been nice if the fates had aligned otherwise, for sure. They always talk about getting the National League back to winter, and it is a winter sport, and these things do add up. But that is one benefit of it, having it played through the summer at least.
For sure. I've also been watching the latest season of Peaky Blinders on the interwebs. So I think the first 4 seasons were on Netflix, and then I've scouted out season 5 on the interwebs, and it's trucking along. Can't go wrong with a bit of Peaky Blinders. What I've actually noticed, having watched the far more content, like TV show kind of content, basically since the lockdown began, what I've noticed is it's in maybe the genres that I like. It is kind of a rinse and repeat cycle as far as like plot goes. So it's maybe it's just how shit is made, and you like there's only so many ways you can serve up a tele series or something like that. But as you got to get, like, for me, I've got to get past the random guy pops in, random guy causes drama. Now there's a situation. Now we got to solve the situation. And the crappier the show, the easier it is to see through that and to see that. At least with something like Peaky Blinders, you don't necessarily pick up on the rinse and repeat cycle of plot narratives. Like, basically, me and you both know, but for our listeners who don't watch Peaky Blinders, it's basically like a Birmingham crime family, and in true Pablo Escobar fashion, old Tommy Shelby tries to get into politics, and the cycle there is that there's a new adversary every couple of episodes, or there's a grand adversary over the course of a season. They got to deal with it and deal with all the machinations and stuff like that. But I still enjoy it, and that's always a good sign. Still enjoying old Tommy Shelby and the issues that he have. Like, one, there's a constant cycle, like a constant tension between women coming into the Shelby family lifestyle as like wives or partners of various characters and not agreeing with the lifestyle. And that's a point of tension that's a plot point in the thing, and it's just that kind of plot point can get a bit repetitive, but otherwise still enjoying it, still liking it.
Yeah, that's always one of those. Yeah, it always reminds me of The Godfather when they do that, like the crime family boss, who's normally, you know, an assertive male figure, and then you've got like the wife who kind of knows what's going on, but is either willfully ignorant or just like not allowed into the room. Like there's the famous scene at the end of Godfather 1 where he's like, don't ask me about my business, and then she sort of looks at him and he says, okay, just this one time, Kay, I'll let you ask me about my business. And then she says, I can't remember what she asked, did you kill so-and-so? And he says, no, I didn't, which is a straight-faced lie, because he obviously did, and we know that. And then she walks out, some other associate walks in, and then he, like, that famous shot of her on the outside of his sort of office room, and him closing the door, like, symbolically keeping her out that way. That always, like, I actually started, I've been saying this for a while, that I wanted to watch Peaky Blinders again from the start, to get the actual, the run of it again. Because it's always a show I very much enjoyed, and I'm behind. I haven't started that season you're up to. I think I'm the one behind that. But I started watching again from scratch a while ago. Last week, I've got about 3 episodes in, but I wasn't sort of watching it full time because I have seen them. So it's just sort of like something on in the background to get through, just to sort of what do you call it? Like just to keep myself to rejig the memory. So you're like halfway through season 1 on that at the moment. I might get back into, well, I will carry on with that. I also have the last season of The Wire to watch. I watch these things real slowly as well. I don't often watch like a back-to-back episode, or 2 back-to-back episodes, should I say. So I'd take, I don't know if it's deliberate. I just don't like sitting there watching binging shows. Maybe that makes me abnormal compared to the general wider TV viewing culture, but I just don't I feel like, okay, I've got this hour in here, I'm going to watch a show and then go do something else sort of thing. So there's that. There's also season 5 of The Way I haven't got around to. I wrote about a show I've just finished watching, which I absolutely loved, and called Lodge 49, and the email this morning, so I don't really want to, I won't go into, all the details about the show and why I loved it. I wrote about that in the thing, but, that was a, fantastic little show that got canned after its 2nd season, and I've just finished the 2nd season, and it ended on a cliffhanger, and it drove me absolutely mental, because I knew that it was gonna, they didn't want to end it. It got cancelled, didn't find the audience, whatever. Like it's often the case with these shows that are just a little bit too humble for their own good sometimes. Like that you just don't pick up the audience and then you disappear before you get the opportunity. Like you don't always just get the generosity and from your studio to be able to finish telling these stories, and so the story just sort of ends abruptly at the end of season 2. They should have at least been able to get a couple more seasons out of it. Outstanding little show that it's really annoying. It's just an annoying little situation. It's one of the reasons why I quite prefer watching a movie, because a movie you're in and out in 2 hours. The entirety of the story that they want to tell, they're going to tell within that 2 hours. You don't get as much room to tell the story, so you get a little less a lot more things are just alluded to, or characterization. You don't get to go as deep into these kind of aspects, but once you start watching it, you know when it ends, you're going to know all the things that you needed to know about it. Maybe you can watch it again, but you get this then with a TV show where you invest in it 1 year, next year it comes back, you invest in it some more, and then it's done, and you never get to see the end of it, and you never actually know how they would have finished telling the story or whatever. And they actually tried to ship it around to other studios to see who would pick it up or whatever, and no one did, so they just kind of leaving it where it is. So anyway, that's Lodge 49 if people want to have a Google of that and have a well, it's worth watching the 2 series that are out there, because I thought they were outstanding, but it's frustrating. It's one of those frustrating kind of things we've talked in one of the intros we did, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we talked about sort of independently releasing music and the frictions between musicians and studios. And here's a good example of like commercialism getting in the way of great storytelling on a TV perspective. And it's it's a frustrating one when you get left hanging like that, I'll tell you that much.
That vibe reminds me of a certain GOT show that used to air. The couple
At least they finished it though.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I know. So some might argue that point.
Couple of tunes. Found don't know who he is, Machine Drum, but he did a song with Freddie Gibbs called Cane Train. And another hot pick here, we got Conway the Machine and teaming up with Method Man for a song called Lemon. Those are my two selection from the 27FM playlist this week. You got any tunes for the people here, Wildcard?
Oh, New Fontaine's DC record goes pretty well. I'm trying to think what else I've got. That's the main thing I've been listening to. That, and I mean, I was re-listening to a couple of OC's albums, also known as The OCs, also known as The OCs with an extra E, also known as OCS, also known as, I think there's a couple other iterations in there. Band name seems to change every now and then, but main fella, John Dwyer, absolute genius. He's just sort of like, he's the steady hand in the project. It's just like crunchy garage rock, for out of California, which is, he's sort of the king of that scene at the moment, which also includes guys like Ty Segall and Meat Bodies and old Michael Cronin and fellas like that. Like there's a big old scene going on with a lot of those fellas. Which the reason I was listening to that as well, reason I was going back to a couple OC's albums is because they had a song featured in an episode of Lodge 49, and I was thinking how, like, first of all, how instantly recognizable it was. Second of all, how outstanding it is when they're relatively, like, not going to call them an obscure band, but they are a band that isn't, like, mainstream by any means. When that pops up in the show that you like, it's kind of like a two worlds colliding like that. It was kind of cool. So that sent me off in a little bit of a rabbit hole, which is one of them things. Yeah, that's probably what I had on the cards tunes-wise.
Rightio, over the weekend we had Lydia Ko doing bloody well. She was doing bloody well throughout the whole LPGA Marathon Classic, which wrapped up this morning. She had the lead. She was going head-to-head with her good friend, Danielle Kang, who I believe is another Korean golfer, but she is from the USA. And then Lydia Ko, the last 5 holes, she went from 18 under to 14 under, and Danielle Kang ended up winning at 15 under. So Lydia Ko, she had two bogeys and a double bogey in those last 5 holes, and basically went from winning that tournament to finishing tied for second. Now, it is a bummer. Like, you'd much prefer Lydia Ko to win that tournament, but I'm always on the side of Lydia Ko, and that's been prevalent throughout the Niche Cache's coverage of Lydia Ko. So for a bit of context, Danielle Kang won last week's Drive On tournament. So this is her second win in a row, and Lydia Ko hasn't finished in the top 10 since July last year, and she hasn't finished in the top 20 since August last year. So when you compare where Lydia Ko's coming from and where Danielle Kang's coming from, unfortunately, the Danielle Kang is just far more comfortable winning golf tournaments right now than Lydia Ko. But also, like, given where Lydia Ko's come from, finishing tied for second, yeah, sure. Like, those last 5 holes is basically a golfer's nightmare. But Lydia Ko, knowing what we know about Lydia Ko, she's not going to let that, haunt her for going into the next tournament, which I believe will be on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or so next week. She's really upbeat. She's positive, happy to be there, kind of chick. And I think it's just a really solid tournament for Lydia, and she's trending in the right direction. She's played 3 tournaments this year. She missed the cut of the Australian Open back in February, and then last weekend at the Drive-On Championship that Danielle Kang won, she finished tied for 28th. Now she's tied for 2nd. So it was a pretty hectic morning this morning and pretty crazy last 5 holes there for Lydia Ko. However, if you step away from the drama of Lydia Ko coming so close and, bounce back, come back victory after years of being in the abyss and all that stuff, if you can step away, you can very easily appreciate that Lydia Ko is in a very good space. She's playing good golf, and to be honest, I'm just grateful that she was there in the mix, considering that I've spent the last 2 to 3 years writing about Lydia Ko, and I've been right there with her through her struggles. So still pretty happy, still pretty chuffed that Lydia Ko's there. And to be honest, Wildcard, obviously you want to win. You play sports to win. However, I wouldn't prefer, but I think it's interesting in the fact that Lydia Ko, if she can consistently finish in the top 10, if she can consistently finish in the top 20, that is going to be more beneficial to winning one tournament and then going back to where she was. Right now with Lydia Ko, my message to Kiwi sports fans, anyone out there, right now for Lydia Ko, she needs consistent top 10, top 20 finishes. That's what she needs for a variety of reasons, whether it's just, playing consistent golf, building her confidence in what she's doing. And given how up and down many other professional golfers are, if you can consistently finish top 10, top 20 of a LPGA or PGA Tour, you're doing exceptionally well. So instead of like a high point and then a low point maybe with a win and then just falling back into the oblivion, I want Lydia Ko just to get steady top 10 finishes. And the context is important here because all of this, it stems from a place where Lydia Ko was largely a non-factor on the LPGA Tour. So instead of going from basically the bottom to one big win and then falling off again, right now with Lydia Ko, we wanted to go from the bottom and just develop some consistency, develop some confidence. Not that she lacks confidence, but just develop playing good golf, build it up, be consistent, and let things happen from there.
Yeah, I think maybe she does lack a little bit of confidence from, I watched the end of that, probably the last 4 holes or something, and I'd been following it sort of on Twitter before that, as it was up to the point where, what was it with, she was like 5 shots clear after 12 holes this morning, and then ended up not winning by a shot. Even just down to the, so yeah, it was getting dramatic. So I thought I'd better chuck the old Sky Go on the phone while I was writing, and had a good watch of that. I'm not a person who watches golf under any normal circumstances, so but quite a thrilling kind of conclusion there, because you could feel the momentum going one way, and it wasn't towards Lydia Ko. And the point you made about up against one of her best mates, but up against someone who's won a tournament as recently as last week, and it just makes a difference. It's just one of those wider sporting lessons. Winning is a habit, and you gotta to close out, to have that clutch gene that they talk about in American sports. Most of that just comes from experience and confidence, and it's the mental game, being able to perform under the most pressure in the exact same way that you performed up until that point. And Lydia Ko, was fantastic for how many holes in a thing? 72, So fantastic for 60 plus of those. and then couldn't close it out at the end. That's probably like one of those things where if you were finishing consistent top 10, top 5 finishes and you're always in the hunt, you wouldn't feel the pressure so much as like coming from having won not a whole lot in the last 3 years, especially after having been real proficient, winning a whole lot before that as a teenager. Like, you're gonna feel that pressure more when it feels like this is your one chance, as opposed to if you can just know that you, like, trust that more often than not you're gonna be in the mix, and that if things go your way, you're gonna be able to, like, oh well, if things go your way, you might win. If things don't go your way, you feel like, well, if they had next time, maybe next time will be the one. You just stay in the hunt, basically, and if you don't have that, it's just a different game. Like the two leaders in that tournament down the stretch going into the final hole, like very different mental processes they will have been going through because of that. And like Lydia Ko had a shocker on, even like it was shocking close down through the last several holes, but even just down to that last one, like she missed a long putt that would have tied it, forced the playoff. She overshot the green at one point and had trouble getting back onto it. Like it was a bit of a horror show, really. But the fact that she got herself into that position, as you rightly say, has got to be the thing to focus on. And I think, I sort of think two aspects of the same situation with that. One is that, like, the focusing on the positive of that is definitely like you got to look at the progress she's making specifically, and like as you just did, like that's the angle to take. Like if she can consolidate herself as being that kind of golfer again who's like consistently in the hunt, then she's doing all right. Like that's better than winning one off and then falling back as you say again into the abyss or whatever. Like that is much more effective. I worry a little bit about how that will be perceived around the traps just from New Zealand wider sporting circles, because while she is someone who represents a newer generation pushing through in Kiwi sports and reflecting a different kind of mentality on all these kind of things, the people who tend to be the gatekeepers and how golf is talked about in this country are not of that generation, and perhaps will take a more dramatic point of view. But the reason it's a more dramatic point of view is because I think there's just a disconnect between where she is currently. Like the last 3 years, that's not a small sample size. That's 3 years of her not being that consistent championship level golfer that she was before that, which means that like if it's not a small sample size, at some point you got to accept that this has become the norm, which means that's the perspective you got to be looking at. And from that perspective, to be challenging down the stretch for a tournament like this is a big positive. If you still look at her like she was when she was like 15, 16, 17 and expecting her to be at the level she was when she was the number one back in the day, then this is a disappointing result. And it's just a matter of adjusting those perspectives, I think, because she's been away from that level for long enough that I don't think you can expect that of her. And I remember talking about this on the podcast a while back, and you pointed out that basically no one who was competing at that time when Lydia Ko was number one is still competing consistently at that same level. Like, it's just the way that women's golf has evolved in that time since. And it's a short period, but it's a long enough period that there's evidence to prove it. Like, it's just way more competitive now. It's a different context to be looking at it, and I think that disconnect gets lost on a lot of sort of wider, more generic Kiwi sports fans, and the kind of reaction that we'll see to this on the Telly News kind of thing tonight is going to be reflective of that. Having said that, I don't think Lydia Ko is a person who would be following what like TV1 or TV3 or Prime News or whatever have to say about her latest performance. I just don't think she's someone who really cares about that, eh?
Definitely not, and that's the wider idea that I find so fascinating with Lydia Ko, because I've learned so much from Lydia Ko, and like not necessarily because she's not older than me, I started doing yoga before her and shit like weird shit but
so really she's learning from you.
Yeah. But then again, how positive Lydia Ko as a young woman from New Zealand has been while shit has clearly hit the fan. Like, let's be honest, she has been through the ringer. It's been an incredibly tough 3, 4, 5 years for Lydia Ko. Holy hell, like, most people in her position would be, like, struggling to maintain a mental state, let alone playing professional golf while she's doing that. And here she is. She's still fucking here. She's still out here, smiling, being happy, competing. And so, regardless of who you are, regardless of what profession, what area of society you exist in, there's so much to learn in how positive Lydia Ko is. And that, understanding that and learning from that, to me, her results are like second fiddle. I want her to be playing good golf, and like, it's just, life is just that little bit better. If Lydia Ko is in the top 10, in the top 20, that's great. But regardless, she's happy. And I think a lot of the people in New Zealand, when they talk about Lydia Ko, they just completely ignore that. And my message is to use Lydia Ko as an inspiration for you as an everyday Kiwi listening. Tap into Lydia Ko's, like, how she's performing. Follow her on social media. Follow her as a person, and you will see that there is no relationship between her results and how she is as a human. Whether she wins or loses, she is exactly the same person. And that is something that everyone, especially young Kiwis, can really dig into and try and apply to their lives. So, yeah, for sure, like, Lydia Ko is out here leading the way for young Kiwis, and of a similar ilk. I for some reason, I saw that Lord was trending on Twitter. So I clicked it, and I saw a tweet that said that Lord hadn't done any social media posts for 1,000 days. So whether it's Lydia Ko or whether it's Lord, maybe it's Steven Adams and how he conducts himself. There's just so much inspiration. There's so much direction for young Kiwis to follow from these type of characters, specifically young Kiwis, athletes and creatives who are doing amazing things on the international stage. Pay attention to them. Follow them. Take inspiration from them. We talk a lot about, like, how many points Steven Adams scored, where Lydia Ko finished, those type of narratives, because we love sport and we love discussing sport. But as people, and for young Kiwis, we have leaders who have laid it all out there on how to just be a good person, how to operate. Like, 1,000 days, no social media for one of the biggest pop stars in the world is fucking unheard of. But that's the life Lord's living. That's who she is as a person. That's what she's operating. That's how she's operating. And that tells us young Kiwis that social media isn't the be-all and end-all. Whether you're on social media posting consistently or not, it doesn't fucking matter. None of that shit matters. And this is so important because these are young Kiwis who are doing this shit. They're leading the way on how to be a good young person. And that's where Lydia Ko is held. That's why she's held in such great esteem in my mind and through the niche case. Just to hammer home a point, I guess, here, Wildcard. Do you remember Michelle Wee?
I certainly do. The original Lydia Ko.
Phenom. The original Lydia Ko, the Phenom. Her rookie year was 2009. She's 30 years old now. She hasn't played a tournament this year. Understandable. She played 4 tournaments last year. Her last 3 tournaments last year, she missed the cut on every tournament. So that tells you a lot. There's two big takeaways from that. A, how difficult it is for a young, like she was Lydia Ko before Lydia Ko, and now she's barely a factor on the LPGA Tour. So that puts into perspective what Lydia Ko's doing and who she is. And also, part of that may be because it reinforces the idea of the strength of the LPGA Tour. Back in 2009, back in 2010, 2011, maybe the tour, the women's tour, LPGA Tour, wasn't so good. And so Michelle Wie could come in and dominate and be like a superstar. Maybe earlier in Lydia Ko's career, LPGA Tour wasn't so good. So she could grab some wins, bit of an unknown factor, and really dominate the whole LPGA scene. Now, far more competitive, far more difficult to dominate the LPGA Tour because there's just so many good golfers.
Yeah, you reminded me of, because I was just thinking like how, just on a wider scale, how tough it must be to be one of those like those young phenomenal athletes who are talked up from the time you're like 15 or even younger sometimes, to be like the expectations put upon you are there. And like Lydia Ko may not be winning too many titles at the moment, but she was like legit an extremely dominant number one golfer for a while there. And like whether she gets back to that level or not, she still achieved that level at one point in her career. Like, it just seems like, I don't know, I'm always fascinated by, a couple of things that I'm fascinated by that we've talked about. One is that like when there's a disconnect between who a person is as a person and who a person is, the way they're perceived by the wider community, that always, is quite interesting to me, how that kind of dynamic shakes out. And there's a good, like, pretty good example that we've just talked about here. And then also like just that thing of when you like, how are you even supposed to cope when you're not even like developed as a human yet and you've got these expectations on you? It reminded me of, you remember that fella Freddie Adu? I was trying to think about where his name came up in something I wrote about not that long ago, and I can't remember where it was. He must have crossed paths with one of the Flying Kiwis at some point, but like Freddie Adu was talked about when he was 14 years old. He's an American guy, Ghanaian heritage. They talked about him like he was the next Pele. When he was 14 years old, he's only 31 now. I just looked it up, and he's gone nowhere. Like he's barely even a professional footballer now. He never got anywhere close to those expectations, and like he might have been a reasonable journeyman professional for 10, 15 plus years of a career if people hadn't told him that he was going to be this extreme once in a generation talent, and like that kind of ruined him. Like I'm sure there must be a good documentary on him somewhere out there, or a book or something, because I'd be kind of interested to see what actually happened with that dude. I just remember he was talked about like they were literally calling him the next Pele, and then he just never went anywhere.
I definitely remember like Freddie Adu and Michelle Wie were kind of the poster teenagers of that whole shtick.
Yeah, real similar age, yeah.
So Freddie Adu did what he did, and then you think about Lydia Ko, and she actually succeeded. Then she went through professional golfing hell, and she's still here. Michelle Wie's not there. Granted, I think she had a baby this year, but based on her form last year, you can make the same argument. And Freddie Adu's not fucking there. Like, some of these, like, we got to keep this into context, and I think just going back to gratitude and just going back to appreciation of the fact that Lydia Ko is still there. So I just always try to come back to gratitude with Lydia Ko, whether, you know, it's a bummer. It's a bummer if Lydia Ko doesn't perform, but it also, the past few years just make it so much easier to dive into that gratitude, because you're like, well, Lydia Ko just finished tied for second. She dominated this tournament up until the last 5 holes. It's just cool. Like, it just makes you grateful that Lydia Ko's still out here representing Aotearoa to the fullest.
Yeah, for sure. I remembered, I just looked at his Wikipedia page. I remember where it was that Freddie Adu's name came up. It was while I was doing the thing about the history of, it was during lockdown, writing about the history of Kiwi footballers in the MLS. Well, Freddie Adu was like 15 or 16 years old. He was actually on, it must have been one of the championship rosters, or the championship roster that when DC United won the MLS, captained by a certain Ryan Nelson. So there's a cheeky little brush with those two guys. Probably came from extremely different backgrounds with extremely, like the Ryan Nelson coming out of Christchurch and battling away to end up playing like what did he get up to? At least 150, it might have even been 200 plus Premier League games. Like that's not an archetypal career narrative there. And for him to battle away to get where he was, probably had to work extremely hard, and also not only that, had to get extremely lucky, and probably had to beat a few barriers and sort of expectations down, and show up the way he did. Whereas Freddie Adu was not given anything for free, but just lumped with this enormous burden straight away, like straight out of the blocks. And yeah, you feel sorry for fellas like that because you don't know how things might have been if you'd just like been a bit more casual with it. Like it doesn't take much to realize that there's a completely like borderline child abuse to tell a 14-year-old that he's expected to be this kind of level of a footballer. And yeah, then I guess the other thing is the constant gratitude and just accepting where we are and whatever. And I spoke last week about that book I was reading about the Golden State Warriors, and there was a bit in it that stuck with me about a quote that Andre Iguodala had, and it was Andre Iguodala, the way he left the Warriors. He was the Finals MVP in their first championship run. Such a key player for them coming off the bench. And the way it sort of ended for him was pretty rough, obviously. Like, they had to trade him away in order to be able to do the sign and trade thing to get rid of Kevin Durant, take back D'Angelo Russell, wouldn't it? And then they've since flipped him to, Minnesota. And Iguodala just sort of, at the end of it, as often happens in professional sports, got treated like a bit more of just a bit of a trade bait type thing. And I think he's playing, where is he now? Miami, in the bubble, doing the veteran status thing, so good for him. But there was a line that he said about it where the author was asking about like the way, I think they might have been talking about his chances of making the Hall of Fame or something like that, or there was some debate or something, or I don't know, something along those lines, like one of those kind of like career accolade type things. And he was asked about it, and he said like, I don't care. And they're like, you don't care like your legacy or whatever? And he's like, it doesn't matter. Like, eventually it all ends. Like, maybe I make the Hall of Fame, and then somewhere down the line I still get forgotten. It's just a name in a book somewhere. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's just about appreciating what you got now and that kind of thing. And that kind of like that comes off almost as a bit nihilistic, but there is a really beautiful kind of thing to that level of stoicism, like just accepting that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people get swept up in the winning and the the trophies and the medals and stuff like that, because that is what you play for. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like, there's people, the point was made in that book, like, Michael Jordan doesn't often seem like a happy person. Like, he's just so driven competitively. He's spilling into all other aspects of his life. And it was very easy to see that, as good as it was, the Last Dance documentary, many people have pointed this out. Like, I'm not making any sort of grand statement here, but it's very, very easy to see that documentary as Michael Jordan asserting his legacy to a new generation of fans. And on that note, it worked perfectly. But he doesn't necessarily seem like, for all his success, like the obvious guy that people would point to as the greatest player of all time. Won 6 championships and all them MVPs and scoring titles and everything he achieved. Like, he owns a team now. He's a billionaire who can, like, to this day, still makes more money off Jordan brand sneakers than any current player in the NBA does. Like, he sells more Jordans than like any other current player is selling of their own shoes, which is insane when you think about it. Like, that's just absolutely crazy. But he doesn't seem like the person who feels like he has the most fulfillment in his life necessarily, or else you wouldn't really feel the need to go out and make a 8-hour like statement documentary about how great you were. Whereas, like, then the author compared that to Charles Barkley. This is the Ethan Sherwood Strauss book called The Victory Machine, because I don't think I mentioned that. I talked about it last week, but he then mentioned running into Charles Barkley at the airport. Charles Barkley, who famously never won an NBA title, but Charles Barkley, who went through plenty of grief, often a lot of it deservedly, because he said some dumb things and did some dumb things in his life. He also got picked on a little bit because he played up to a bit of a bad boy image sometimes. But Charles Barkley, pretty much the same age as Michael Jordan, has a full-time gig working on one of the TV broadcasting things where he's great. He's fantastic on telly. He goes out golfing and whatever and just seems to enjoy his life. And Ethan Sherwood Strauss wrote in the book near the end about running into him and just how, like, having a 20-second interaction with Charles Barkley and just how joyful and happy he seemed and how fulfilled he seemed. Like a guy who never achieved what you expect to necessarily as a basketballer, who still gets picked on for not having won a championship, like one of the great players never to have done so. But he seems to be just living his best life right now, and you can't necessarily say that about other players who won multiple championships, and that's always something to fall back on, isn't it? Like, if you have that base, you want to win, you play to win. Lydia Ko is trying to win these tournaments, but if she can fall back on just the consistency of her character and knowing that she's going through the right processes and just enjoying the fact that she gets to travel the world and playing golf, which she absolutely seems to do all of these things, ultimately, like, you're getting what you want to out of your life, aren't you? Like, win or lose. The winning and the losing is secondary to these things, right?
Definitely. What I'd add to, it's actually a nice segue. I think a lot of New Zealanders and maybe the media, like, New Zealand is so good at sport that it's kind of maybe not expected, but there's the appreciation for the mere fact that we have Stephen Adams, that we have Lydia Ko, we have artists like Lord, we've got creatives like Taika Waititi. The list is endless. We've talked about it plenty on the Nichecast. And it's like, I don't know if it's indifference, but there's like, if you're not winning, you're not good. But we've got surfers on the international surf scene. Like, every sport, New Zealand has athletes, teams that are among the world's best. And you can either look at that through like, yeah, it's just what we do, we only talk about the people who are winning, like that type of shit. Or come back to that gratitude and you're just like, holy shit, like, this is amazing. We've got insert individual here, insert team here, they're doing so-and-so. That's really cool. I like it. And I'd advise, like, if you're listening to the Nichecast and you're listening to the Nichecast, that's probably the best way to think and operate in appreciation of Aotearoa's sporting excellence. And we've talked about basketball and the rise of basketball, and now we're getting a couple players being picked up by Australian clubs. So the number of Kiwi basketballers playing for Australian clubs is increasing. And that's another beautiful aspect of Kiwi sport. I think we had Max Darling. He's signed to the Illawarra Hawks. Jared Kenny up in Cairns. And then there's the Yanni Wetzel. I think he's with that Southeast Melbourne team, Wildcard.
That's the one.
That's the one. So do you want to just break down those signings, offer any other context, any other information? Because what is clear, and we touched on this last week, is that there is a lot more to the Australian NBL from a New Zealand perspective than the New Zealand Breakers. Now we're getting, and what's actually happening is you're getting, I'm sure you'll touch on this when you're breaking down these kind of moves, you're getting players who are rejecting offers elsewhere to be a part of the NBL, and that's an example of where the NBL's sitting at the moment as far as basketball competitions in the world goes.
Yeah, man, it's pretty exciting, to be honest, and it's a good reminder to people that the Breakers don't have to be the be all and end all of Kiwi representation in a league like the Aussie NBL there. Yeah, you already had I think you've got 5 Kiwis under contract at the Breakers currently. So the 2 Webster brothers, Tom Abercrombie, Finn Delaney, Rob Lowe. You've also now, as of the last week with Max Darling and Jarrod Kenny signing, you've now got 6 with other Australian NBL teams currently as things stand. Still hopeful of a couple more. We peaked at 17 players who played some part, 17 Kiwis who played some part of this competition last year. I don't know that we're going to get back up to that level. I think for one thing, the Breakers are going to have a couple fewer, so that already doesn't help with that little baseline. Mika Vakona basically retired at this point. Hopefully might hang around for some Tall Blacks action, try get them to the Olympics. He did play a little bit for Nelson in the NBL, but yeah, pretty well done at the end of his contract there with Brisbane. So there's one or two drop-offs there which might not be picked up for, but at the same time, Yanni Wetzel is a new player to this league. Max Darling is a new player to this league. Both those two guys, really exciting players and prospects. Yanni Wetzel is a big fella who can shoot very well. He can play power forward or center, probably more of a center in this league, though not necessarily. We'll see how he goes with Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. He is coming back from his college experience. It was disappointing for him. He didn't get the opportunity to play out his senior year there at the NCAA tournament, where he could have been, a little bit of a sneaky underground little star there. Who knows? He was well poised for something like that. He was having his best season, so disappointing. But he comes back and is playing goes straight into the NBL. An interesting one, because I think the Breakers were actually interested in him, and he chose Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. Judd Flavel, assistant coach there, so that would have played a big part. Also worth pointing out, Ruben Tarangi's moved from Brisbane to Southeast Melbourne as well, so there will be 2 Kiwis there. Terrell Harrison on an existing deal at the Brisbane Bullets, Shea Illy on an existing deal at Melbourne United as well. They're also there. Max Darling, Jarrod Kenny's re-signed with the Taipans as sort of their backup point guard. He's you don't need to say too much about Jarrod Kenny, proven veteran. We know what he can offer. They really like him there in Cairns. Everyone likes him everywhere he goes, to be fair. And he's a good leader and a great defensive player. Obviously the co-defensive player of the year in the NBL, the Kiwi NBL this season as well. So, know exactly what he offers. And there was talk that maybe Perth might have wanted to bring him back as well. They wanted a veteran point guard to bring off the bench. Cairns got him back. Max Darling is the most interesting of these guys, though, because he didn't go to college. He's still old enough that he could. He's only about 18 or 19 now. He went and spent 2 years in Croatia playing as a professional instead, trying to go down the old, shall we call it, the Luka Doncic role, the Luka Doncic path, shall I say, where, just be a pro in Europe for a few years and then come out and go to the NBA, whatever you call them, the little scrimmage things that they have, the workouts and all that, and see where you can go. He did 2 years there. I didn't check. I think he signed a 3-year deal in Croatia. I'm not sure, but he came back anyway during the pandemic, and he was you could see him as a figure on the bench a few times with helping out with the Canterbury Rams, where he played previous to going to Europe. He has signed a 3-year deal with the Illawarra Hawks, I think it is. I think it's 3 years, which is fascinating because that takes him right up until his last year of NBA draft eligibility. So he's obviously like finished with the European thing. Now he's coming back. That shows a couple different things. One, it shows the strength of the NBL and how much focus that can get from NBA scouts that he's going down this way. You think of like the buzz around LaMelo Ball and RJ Hampton, for example, last season, and Max Starling looking to tap into a little bit of that, and the timing of the thing as well to line up with his final year of draft eligibility, giving him the maximum amount of time to develop as a player there, and pretty excellent little pathway there, you'd have to imagine, and it's a nice, ambitious move from a young Kiwi basketballer as well, so that's probably the most exciting of all these ones. I've had a look around the different rosters and the way they're shaping up. I'm not sure how many more we can get. The Breakers have, I think, one more import spot. Not sure. They have one more import spot. I think they have one more local spot. I'm not sure what they'll do with that. They're looking to get an import big man, so we're probably looking at someone who can play on the wings and defend a bit for their final local spot. And thinking of players who fit that mold, like Hiram Harris, who's just like straight off the bat, I think he would be a pretty outstanding fit for the Breakers if they could get someone like that in there for that last spot. But we'll see how that goes. Alex Pledger, as far as I know, is still living in Melbourne, so you'd be hopeful that he can re-sign with Melbourne United, but they already have a backup centre, so whether or not they want him as their starter, or if they think they can get an import to do that job, I'm not sure. So it's a little bit tricky to wonder what's going on there, but at the same time, like Melbourne United, obviously, if you're in Victoria right now, you got bigger things to worry about, and they actually have had like positive corona tests within that Melbourne United group too, so I think their priority right now isn't so much free agency as just like the general health of everyone involved with the club. So, best wishes to all them fellas. There was also like Taylor Britt has said in at least one media interview that he's done during the NBL here, where he had been in talks to return to Perth. They signed, I think, Kevin White to be their backup veteran point guard presence on the bench. So whether that is instead of having an extra point guard like Taylor Britt, or whether that is alongside someone, I'm not sure if he's. I'll have to look up the development player rules. I'm not sure if he's eligible to do that again, but that would be nice. We'll see how that goes, because there's a couple other Kiwi players who would be eligible for that status as well, which could boost those numbers up a few more. At the moment, we got the 11 Kiwis signed on for NBL 21. I'm sure we'll get at least one or two more. We haven't heard much of Isaiah Leafa, for example, yet. There had been buzz around him signing somewhere, and guys like Jordan Natai and Tom Vodanovic have experienced at that level and had great NBLs. Whether it's just a matter of whether there's like, it's one thing to be good enough, it's another thing for a team to need a player in your particular role at this particular time. So it just maybe things won't shake out for some of these dudes. I'm not sure. We'll just got to play the patient waiting game, don't we? But it's been pretty fun, particularly to see as well I think the Yanni Wetzel and the Max Starling signings, because they're two guys who are new to this league, choosing this as a pathway to further their careers, and the ambition, particularly from Max Starling, who's very clearly still looking at how can he get himself to the NBA and what are the best opportunities for him to get to that level. So that's where the excitement is for me for all this. But it's just got to hammer home that point again, that like, regardless, like the Breakers have 5 top quality Tall Blacks guys who are going to be in every single Tall Blacks squad as well. So it's just like, as long as they're available, they're there. But the Kiwi depth goes well beyond the Breakers in the NBL too.
Definitely. Similar vibe, actually. Again, like the whole niche case and the whole niche cast, the premise is highlighting and celebrating Kiwi sport. So, similar line here, Wildcard. Sarpreet Singh, he's on the move. Now, even I know, as a fringe football character, that him leaving Bayern Munich right now, albeit on a loan deal, is a great thing. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yeah, more or less, I'd say so. He's going to FC Nuremberg, and I don't know. I maybe would just like take it down a slight notch from great, or maybe great is where it is and just not outstanding. Like, yeah, we'll probably go with that. It's like it's not the perfect option, but it's great. It still falls in the great category. Yeah, he's just sort of at that point, second year of a 3-year contract. Although I'm sort of like he signed with the Bayern reserves initially. I don't know, I was sort of holding out. I was hoping maybe he'd get improved terms from the senior team or something like that, but there's not really any hurry. Like, there's no need to do that. And he's just been, like, progressing nicely and pushing everything forward up to this point, so no dramas for him. This comes about from how well, like, rather than, like, the obvious thing is he's not quite at first team level yet. But the reason he's gone out on loan is because while he's not at first team level, remember, like, Bayern just bought Leroy Sané for a whole lot of money as well from Man City, and they got no shortage of depth in those creative positions, and he did play twice, once off the bench and one start during the last Bundesliga season. His start came after they'd already wrapped up the title. Sat on the bench several times, didn't necessarily play. Like, it's a club like Bayern, they have all the talent they need and will always have all the talent they need because they can buy it. You know, there's always going to be so much competition for places, so you don't necessarily just sit. He could sit on the bench and wait around and hope to, like, he's not necessarily going to be on the bench if everyone's fit and available as well. Probably wouldn't be, to be honest, if everyone was fit and available, which they more or less are at the moment, and he didn't make the cut for their Champions League squad, although, like, this loan coming so soon after that, I think probably those two things are related. I think maybe he would have been in the Champions League squad had he not been planning to, had the plan not been to send him out on loan. And since it was, you don't want to necessarily, like, he'd be missing out on pre-season with his loan team were he to be, like, not playing for Bayern on a deep Champions League run. So the timing of that is probably quite deliberate. But, like, he could have another season hovering around the first team and not playing hardly any football. But the level that he reached already, like, playing for the reserve team in the third division, showed that he's too good for reserves, not quite good enough for first team. Well, what do? You find somewhere in between. So he's going to go play in the second tier for FC Nuremberg, who weren't very good last year, but they have been a bit of a yo-yo team in general. They actually had to play a relegation playoff not to drop to the third division. But they are, I found this out doing a little bit of research about them. They are the team who has the record for the most times relegated from the Bundesliga, so which I think is 9 times over their history. So if you're getting relegated a lot from the top flight, it means you're also being in the top flight a lot. They're actually a powerhouse club, like one of the top teams in Germany back in, like, between the 2 world wars. Since then, things haven't been as good. Like, the last 50 years haven't gone as well as the 50 years before that, but that's what Sarpreet Singh's in there to help turn around. The goalkeeper from the reserves has also gone on loan to from Bayern to Nuremberg as well, so Sarpreet's got a little bit of company there, and I guess the plan is just he's got a season now in the second tier. One of the reasons why I thought this move wasn't, like, completely perfect is I kind of would have liked to see him just playing at a lesser Bundesliga club, still playing top flight, but I guess if that's the case, then you've got to balance that with would he be playing as often for a team like that, and possibly no. So you go somewhere where at least he's guaranteed to be starting most weeks, and then he's just got to do what he was doing for the Bayern reserves when he was starting most weeks for them in the first half of last season, and just continue to score goals, set up goals, be an impactful player every week, and then you see where you go on top of that. So it's definitely doesn't mean anything negative about his time at Bayern Munich. In fact, it's a positive. It shows he's progressed past the reserve team. And then it's just a matter of how far he can take his development, getting, like, regular senior football at that level. It'd be interesting to know what the second tier in Germany, how that compares to A-League. I wouldn't know. I don't know anyone's ever thought to compare them, so don't really have a clue on that matter. I remember Paul Eiffel saying that in his time he thought the A-League was pretty comparable to, like, lower championship, higher League One in England, so lower second tier, higher third tier, though I think the English Championship would be a bit stronger than the German second tier. But yeah, dealing in abstracts there because there's no way to like convincingly say one way or another. But yeah, just got to play a whole lot of football, score some goals, set some goals up, be impressive for Nuremberg, lead them towards another promotion so next year they can get that record 10th relegation and once he leaves and see how we go from there. It's all still on the upwards trajectory. It's still just another step up the ladder.
Any other hard and fast Flying Kiwis information that you want to share with the people? Or is it a bit quiet on that front?
It is a little bit quiet on the front. I will throw out a quick shout out to a club called IFK Berga in Sweden who have signed both Jesse Edge and Matty Conroy. So a couple New Zealanders showing up there. That is Division 1 stuff in Sweden, I think it is. So that is the same level as Joel Stevens and Francis de Vries, who are playing starting pretty much every week for a team called Varnamo, but they're in the South Division. Edge and Conroy are going to be playing in the North Division. Joel Stevens actually scored on the weekend as well. But it's, interesting thing there that there's 4 New Zealanders now who are playing in the third tier in Sweden, and they're both in pairings at different clubs, one in each conference basically. And then the other one to mention is that the MLS's back tournament coming up towards its big finale this week on Thursday or something like that. I'm not sure actually when the final is, but we had a few New Zealanders they made it as far as the semi-finals. Minnesota United, unfortunately, well beaten by Orlando City with old mate Nani. Remember Nani used to play for Manchester United in Portugal, and he scored a couple brilliant goals actually in that one to knock Minnesota United out. Michael Boxall playing regularly and being a leader for Minnesota United. You also had James Musa playing at least once off the bench there as a sort of defensive midfield utility for them. No sign of Noah Billingsley. He, in his first year as a professional there, he didn't make any of the matchday squads. I don't know if he's there in the bubble or not. I actually didn't think to check, but yeah, that's how that one went. However, on the other side of the draw, Bill Tuiloma's Portland Timbers did make it through to the final, so there's no conflict as to who to cheer for in the final there. Portland versus Orlando. You got Bill Tuiloma, who started 2 games in the group stage, since then didn't play up until this last semi-final where they had to cling on towards the end there after conceding a dumb goal, thinking that they had the game nicely won. Can't remember who they played against. It was last week now, and I'm not up to writing that bit in Flying Kiwis yet. And yeah, he came on, played the last 5 minutes as they kind of closed that one out there, and took Portland through to the grand final. So there's one to watch there. Could be a little bit of silverware potentially for Bill Tuiloma.
Beauty, do you have any insights on the Wellington Phoenix, or are they just kind of treading water at this moment? Last Wednesday, they had a 1-1 draw against the Brisbane Roar, and this Thursday, they're playing against the Newcastle Jets, who are mid-table. What do you reckon about the Wellington Phoenix at the moment?
Yeah, that Jets game is their last one before the playoffs, and it is. I mean, to be honest, it's been disappointing that they've played well in patches, but they haven't been able to put a 90-minute performance together yet. Like, they probably haven't really even got past a 60-minute performance, and that's been frustrating because they came into the restart in a position where if they could just like take care of business, get the results, then second place was all theirs for the taking. That isn't really the case anymore. I don't think Melbourne City have played yet in their next game, but it doesn't really matter. It's all out of the Phoenix's hands at this point. It's looking like probably third if they can get a nice result against Newcastle. And that is a shame because it means they miss out on the first round bye. It means instead of playing, I think it would have been 2 games in 5 days, they now have to, if they're going to win the title, they will have to play 3 games, play and win as well. 3 games in about either 7 or 8 days, depending on how the seedings shake out. And that is tough. Like, that is going to be a very different prospect coming up against a team which will likely be Melbourne City in the semi-finals if they get there. Like, if you got to go play against them, who they've been rested for a week, and you're playing on like a 4-day turnaround, that's not easy. Like, that's making things extremely difficult, let alone to then like have to back that up. Whoever would win would then have to back that up in a grand final of like 4 or 5 days after that. Like, it's making the task a whole lot more difficult. But I mean, that's the task that they're due now. Like, that's their own fault. They didn't take care of the results that they could have at the time when they had that opportunity, and now this is what happens. Like, they've only won 1 of 5 games since the restart, and you just got to deal with your consequences. If they have to do it the hard way, they have to do it the hard way because of their own, I guess you could say sloppiness. I don't know. They haven't felt like they've been sloppy. They just haven't felt like they've been ruthless enough. Particularly that game against Brisbane, they had more than enough chances to win that game comfortably, and just couldn't put the ball in the net often enough. They got the one they needed. Like, they could easily have had 3 or 4, and so it goes. That's the way that these kind of things go. The feeling I have about the Phoenix, though, once they get into playoffs, is that kind of, like, in league football, you've got to be able to score your goals because you've got to be able to win your games. That's how you get your way up the table. It's 3 points for a win, only 1 for a draw. It's incentivized that you've got to get those wins. That's how you rise your way up there. In knockout football, in playoff football, semi-final football, not so much the case. Like, that ability to just keep yourself in the game, which the Phoenix are very good at. Like, they don't win games by a lot of goals. They also don't lose games by a lot of goals. Like, they tend to be mostly close games that they play in. To have that ability to bend and not break at the back, to have that ability to just to keep yourself in the contest for long enough to hopefully sneak that crucial timely goal or whatever. That is a difficult thing to maximize your abilities on a league table with, because you're going to end up with a few too many draws. In knockout football, those draws just take you, someone's got to win on the day. Those draws just take you through to extra time and give you more opportunity to get that sneaky, timely goal. And if it comes down to penalties, I was looking at Stefan Marinovic's record as a penalty saver, because I had a feeling he wasn't a very good shot stopper in open play. Doesn't seem like a guy who's great at penalties. He hasn't saved any of the 3 he's faced in the A-League this season. However, he only conceded 7 of the 10 that he faced in the MLS back when he was with Vancouver, and that 70% seems like a decent enough record. So I don't mind that. I don't hate that. Obviously, you don't want to be going to penalties in extra time when you've got to play so many 3 crucial games, maximum of 3 crucial games in a short space of time, like a week and a half or whatever. But you got to do what you got to do at the same time. So that's kind of the feeling about the Phoenix at the moment, is that they've let a big opportunity slip. Like, they've made things difficult for themselves. Having said that, the main problem that they've had throughout this restart isn't nearly so much of a problem once you get into that do or die knockout footy stuff. So it makes it harder for them, but it doesn't necessarily change the trajectory. I don't know.
Another hard and fast question here. Who is your favorite Wellington Phoenix player right now?
Probably Lydia Ko. I think that'd be a popular answer among many Phoenix fans. We're talking about sporting phenomenons earlier. Liberato Kakache, I consider on a New Zealand footballing context to be a part of that one. You don't always get the level of recognition when you're still playing in New Zealand and when you've come up through a Phoenix pathway kind of thing. But sometimes you just got to do the old gratitude thing again and just step back and look at what this dude's achieved in a short space of time to be what is he, 20 years old currently, and he's the best left back in the A-League. Like, it's kind of outstanding. He wasn't even a left back until he got to the A-League. He was like a defensive midfielder through his days working his way up the academy. And the first time I saw him play, he played as a centre back, I think. So just an outstanding player who's very easy to take for granted, because he's like he plays like a 10-year veteran. He plays like a player who's been been playing A-League football for a decade. He has all the tricks in his book. He doesn't make bad decisions. He's he's a joy to watch, old Lydia Ko, and we are currently I think it's only a matter of time until he turns up in Europe, and there is that link to Belgium. Kevin Muscat actually manages a team in Belgium, and they're one of the teams that's been thrown into the mix. Looking for his signature, the dream down the line would be to get him playing for Napoli, which is his boyhood team, and where his father grew up watching them and supporting them and all that. So that would be the dream down the line. Probably got to go through like a consolidatory step before that, but the fact that Phoenix fans know that Kakache is probably moving onwards and that it's inevitable and that he has to, I think, is also given him a nice little swan song, because like the Sarpreet Singh thing came out of the blue in the off season, whereas with Kakache, he's not going to get a deal as dramatic as Singh got. Nothing like as blockbuster as Bayern Munich, but we sort of, we know that there's a progression in his career that has to happen. And he's getting his little like farewell tour, and he's continuing to be one of the Phoenix's very best players throughout as well. So, shout out Lydia Ko, one of the next generation, or one of the current generation now, you'd have to say.
Right. Well, very quickly, Wildcard, we don't need to dwell on this, but I just want to lay out the table on something that I've been thinking about with the Caribbean Premier League. So, various episodes of the Niche Cast over the last few weeks, we've talked about the Kiwi cricketers who are involved in the CPL. But I've had a few thoughts. I think my first thought with regards to setting the scene for the CPL is Nick Kelly playing for St. Kitts Nevis, I think it is. The Patriots. I don't know. It doesn't say where they're actually from. Yeah, St. Kitts and Nevis Patriots alongside Ish Sodhi. What I was thinking about here, Wildcard, was that there's more fancied batsmen in Aotearoa cricket. You ask anyone, and Devon Conway is already a black cap. Will Young has been on the contracted list for a few years now, missed out on a test debut, but he's there or thereabouts, and there are those type of batsmen in Aotearoa who, like, everyone's looking to as the next batsman to come into the Black Caps team. But then you've got Nick Kelly getting a CPL contract. So that's just something to keep an eye on. That Nick Kelly hasn't really featured in any Black Caps conversations, and to be fair, he probably shouldn't. Like, he had a good season last season after moving down to Otago, showed the goods at Northern Districts Knights just with his white ball batsmanship, and then he moved down to Otago and played all three formats. This is a massive tournament for Nick Kelly. So I just want to make that blatantly obvious for our listeners. Pay attention to Nick Kelly. He's got to crack into that St. Kitts first 11, first and foremost. But then if he gets some runs, and he brings those runs into domestic cricket in Aotearoa, coming off of last season where he was pretty good across all three formats, especially T20 cricket, and don't be surprised if you see Nick Kelly starting to factor more in our conversations, especially our domestic cricket daily conversations and any Black Cap stuff. And then my second one here, because I've when I wrote these and thought about these, I was like, oh, it's a big moment for Scott Kugelheim and the guys like Corey Anderson. Like, they're trying to. I feel like they need a big tournament here to stay in contention with Black Caps cricket. Maybe Tim Seifert as well, but Tim Seifert's a prospect on the rise, and he's at a different kind of stage. And that thought led me to like a a second tier. So what I want to throw up here is there are the dudes in the CPL, and their performances, everyone in the CPL, their performances, but specifically someone like Scott Kugelijn, how they do in the CPL is going to have a flow-on effect at like a level below. So if I'm wary of Scott Kugelijn's status as a fringe black cap, and I am awaiting the CPL with anticipation to see how someone like Scott Kugelijn commands further opportunities. But then it's the flow on of that, because there have been players in the black cap squads who have just been there, like guys like Scott Kugelijn, Seth Rance. They're just always there, and it's debatable whether they've taken their opportunities. And we've talked a lot about young Kiwi talent across all sports. There's a lot of young cricket talent, and the beauty of this CPL is that the domestic summer comes after it. So, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is the first tier is you got to look at how the individuals are performing. So how someone like Scott Kugelijn and Tim Seifert are performing, maybe Corey Anderson as well, those type of characters. Look at how they're performing, and then start to think, like, if any one of those dudes isn't really taking this opportunity at the CPL by the scruff of the neck, then you start to think about dudes in domestic cricket who, if October, November, and December are really good months for them with runs and wickets, they're going to be in a good position to shake things up on the fringes of those black cap squads. Do you kind of catch my drift here, Wildcard?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's Nick Kelly is not a name you expected to come into this conversation, though, is he? Like, it's I can understand Scott Kugelijn because he's played a fair bit of 2020 cricket in particular for the Black Caps. Like, he's got an international record to fall back on. Nick Kelly is not, which is why, like you say, there are other batsmen. There are just other batsmen you would think would come first in that reckoning, which is an interesting one and an incredible opportunity.
Well,
go.
Just on that, like there are other factors at play. So, like other players might not have wanted to go through all the COVID protocols. Nick Kelly was a late call-up, so there's a bunch of South African players who couldn't travel to the West Indies to take part. So it's not like St. Kitts were headhunting Nick Kelly. He's just plugging a hole, and Ish Sodhi is good friends with Nick Kelly. They played together in Northern District Knights, so I imagine that connection opened things up there. Let alone that, like, maybe if you're Devon Conway and you've got a family, or if you're another batsman, you've got a family here in New Zealand, you're preparing for the domestic summer, you're probably doing some training at the Black Caps North Island or South Island facilities. Do you really want to go through all the COVID protocols just to play some T20 cricket? So I think there are some different factors at play there.
Yeah, I didn't think of that connection with Ish Sodhi. That's probably, like, borderline the defining factor in that, because sometimes these decisions are literally as simple as someone being asked, do you know a guy who can fill in, and someone says, well, I know this guy, kind of thing. Like that, it can honestly be as simple as that sometimes in how these things go down. But like, regardless of how it happened, that is a like fascinating opportunity for him to go out there and do something incredible potentially, and absolutely like skyrocket his name up the ranks in terms of like how we look at the domestic players and fellas pushing for wider selections and stuff like that. It's a contrasting one to Kugelijn, I think, isn't it? Because Kugelijn is looking to do this in a consolidatory way. Like Kelly's trying to put himself into the mix. Kugelijn's trying to stay in the mix, like trying to maintain what he's got to at this point. At a time where he was probably like, I think we'd both have discussed this at previous times, like probably got a little stagnant and didn't necessarily like, he did okay enough with his opportunity to hold on to that opportunity as long as nobody else was banging down the door. And then as soon as a couple others came through, Kyle Jamieson seems like the one in particular who really has shaken things up for seam bowlers who can bat a little bit at the bottom of the order. that has just like it's sort of like what we have said about Matt Henry, but on a bigger scale with Matt Henry and Black Caps things, where test team in particular. Matt Henry ODI is a bit of a different story. He's a more established player there, but like you carry the drinks long enough and you come in, you do okay in little opportunities, but if you do okay, all that means is you like keep the status quo. You don't actually advance your case, kind of thing. And yeah, a few interesting scenarios, aren't there, for some of the players going to the CPL? It's definitely going to be one of them, like with the watch, because I think it's the you get the like sort of mid-morning time zones. Am I right with the Caribbean stuff? So like chuck on the little bit of cricket while you're writing away on something, and there it is in the background. I think that's right with the datelines and whatever. They get a little complicated sometimes. They try to keep things in New Zealand time zones when I'm writing about flying Kiwis, for example. But yeah, so it should be a few worth a watch there. You're actually sparking up my interest now. I mean, I don't normally pay any attention to overseas 2020 cricket. I don't even pay as much attention as I probably should to New Zealand domestic 2020 cricket. But I don't know. You got me interested there with a few narratives.
That's my objective. I'm here.
That's the job.
I'm yelling from the rooftops to Kiwi cricket fans. Pay attention to the CPL. Not only do you have a crew of Kiwi cricketers who, like, you explained the difference between Scott Kugelheim and Nick Kelly, and that encapsulates the whole thing. Like, you've got Kiwi cricketers from Ross Taylor at the height of all Kiwi cricketing heights to Colin Munro. You've got Ish Sodhi, who are very good T20 players who are falling away in other formats. You got Mitchell Santner, just a classy operator, probably looking to dominate. You got Corey Anderson coming in from the Oblivion. Like, everyone's in a slightly different spot, and I think it is like the CPL 2020, as in Caribbean Premier League in the year T20. There's a lot of 20s there.
2020 cricket in 2020 is a bit of a wormhole. It
feels very Kiwi cricket hipstery. Like, if you're not necessarily nerdy, like I put on all these different personas, so I'm kind of working through them myself. It is a bit nerdy, paying super duper attention to the Caribbean Premier League, but it feels more hipstery. Because it's like, where are people going to be looking? Probably to the IPL, or they're not even thinking about cricket. But if you're a hipstery kind of cricket fan, you're going to be looking at the CPL and coming to some conclusions based off the CPL that, once again, like, I think the CPL just sets up the cricket summer here in Aotearoa nicely. I think it flows into the home summer nicely, and it's either going to put players in position for the summer, or it's going to put players under pressure for the summer. Like, sure, they're going to go from playing T20 cricket in the CPL. Some of them are going to go IPL, but then some are going to come back to Aotearoa, and they're going to be in a completely different format. They're probably going to be playing Plunkett Shield. So it's hard to, like, go deep into how those two competitions are related, but I do think that it's going to set some players up, and it's going to put a little bit of pressure on other players. And for me, as I'm assessing Kiwi cricket matters, it's always about trends over not a long period of time, but you need a decent sample size. So when I'm coming into discussing Plunkett Shield cricket, and I'm discussing how different players are factoring into the Black Caps mix, I can look at what's happening in the Plunkett Shield, and then I can take it back a bit further and say, oh, well, player X was actually really good in the CPL, and they've carried that form over to the Plunkett Shield, and now we've got a player who is just in great form. And whether it's Tim Seifert, who's been in great form for a number of seasons, whether it's Nick Kelly just coming into some form, or this player has been low-key mediocre over a long period of time. They had a low-key mediocre Caribbean Premier League, there's all these other cricketers coming through to put pressure on them. Like, I just feel like the CPL is helping me assess the Kiwi cricket landscape, I think.
Well, it gives you a nice little... I mean, it gives you some context leading into the season as well. Like, that's why it affects the way that the Plunket Shield and stuff can be viewed, is because it means not everyone is on a blank slate. Because if you're a Black Cap selector, you're paying attention to what these guys do here. Like, you're paying very, very close attention. And that affects the way that other players have to then not just like start off doing their own thing and doing well in the Plunket Shield. They're actually having to respond come week 1 of the Plunket Shield, which is, pretty interesting. I guess also on that, like, just on your most kind of baseline generic just Kiwi cricket fan, not your nerd, not your hipster, but just someone who enjoys watching a bit of cricket. Like, England are up to their second test series since the pandemic started. But I think this is probably going to be the first opportunity we've got to see any New Zealand cricketers play any form of professional cricket since the lockdowns. Am I right there? I can't think of any other examples, unless you count Ben Stokes, of course.
So it's also filling that void, and when I think about like the number of players who would have been playing county cricket and the number of players who are going to be playing minimal amounts of IPL cricket, like county cricket was scratched obviously, but even then there's only 3, 4, 5 players. IPL, you're going to have 1 or 2 players who are playing a lot of games, if that. CPL, you're getting a lot of players playing a lot of games, and that's pretty cool where we're at in 2020. Radio Wildcard. Shout out to Asu Kepaoa. He's from Auckland. He made his debut on the wing for the West Tigers. He had 13 runs for 162 metres. He had 85 post-contact metres. I can't figure out those averages off the top of my head, but Kepaoa had the most post-contact metres of any Tigers back and any Tigers player. They lost 44-4 to the Newcastle Knights. Weird thing about Kepaoa, he's big and he's mobile, but he's not super big. And he's not super powerful, nor is he super quick, but somehow he just chewed through those meters and did a lot of good work running the footy for the Tigers, who are in a bit of a mess at the moment. We also had Emery Perry, who got a glorious 10 minutes off the bench for the fucking Cowboys. Holy shit, give that dude a bit more game time. He had 3 runs for 30 meters, so a solid 10 meters per run there, but 10 minutes of game time can't really come to any conclusions. But he is a very good middle forward for the Cowboys, and like he was a 2-time junior Kiwi. He's from the Waikato region. Tanifaro is a rugby league club in Huntly. Moved to the Gold Coast to play and ended up playing some first 15 rugby on the Gold Coast. But he's coming off 2018, 2019, he played 20 plus games in each of those seasons in reserve grade. And he improved season to season. So he's served his apprenticeship to no end. And they're really developing him slowly at the Cowboys, which is headlined by the fact that he got 10 minutes off the bench. Like, they've taken their time getting him to this debut point, and then they give him 10 minutes. So, don't know what's doing there, but he is a really good prospect who made his debut, so shout out to him. Other than that, we've got this New Zealand Warriors situation. They announced
that
Nathan
situation?
Brown... Yeah, a bit of a situation there. Announced Nathan Brown as coach and Phil Gould in a overseeing role with a focus on junior systems, junior pathways at the Warriors, and I believe part of Phil Gould, like there is the Pacific Islands element as well. Connecting my dots, I believe Phil Gould is going to take an influential role in just all of New Zealand Rugby League matters through his position with the Warriors. So I wrote about this in my Diary of a Warriors Fan thing, where like New Zealand Rugby League and local organisations like Auckland Rugby League and then the New Zealand Warriors, they're all separate entities, and yeah, cool, they're all for the betterment of rugby league in New Zealand, but they each have their own purpose. They each have their own focus. So that's a minor issue in New Zealand Rugby League, is that there's not necessarily the alignment towards an end goal or objective. And I don't want to talk shit about how things were, because the way I'm perceiving all of this stuff and the way I'm processing it is that everything had to happen for the Warriors to get to this point, and everything has had to happen for someone like Phil Gould to help rugby league in Aotearoa at this point. I'm just going to go a bit wild here, wildcard, and say a bunch of shit, and then you can chime in anywhere. The coaching thing with Nathan Brown, well, first off, the Warriors defeated Manly Seagulls, and it's clear that they have made some improvements. I wrote about that in the Monday morning dummy half. They look faster, they look more mobile, more agile, and more intense. So if you're interested in how the Warriors are playing, read that, but also just know that with the rule changes, you want as many natural ballers, natural footy players as possible. And the Warriors have that. They have players who can put on some footwork, they can pass, they can offload. Like when I roll through this list of players, think to yourself, are they like a robot rugby league player, or are they like a backyard type of rugby league player? And I'm talking about Peta Hiku. I'm talking about Jazz Tavanga. I'm talking about Chanel Harris-Tavita, Cody Nikarima. I'm talking about Patrick Herbert, Tohu Harris. Like, I'm seeing a shift in the Warriors. Also involving the departures of David Fusatua, Ken Mamalo. Now, George Jennings and Patrick Herbert, they're a lot faster. So there are some interesting elements in the Warriors in their last two wins, back-to-back wins, that to me signal a shift in how they are playing their footy. So keep that in mind as we move forward. I won't go deep into that because I want to see it over a few more rounds. As for Nathan Brown, I have no opinion on future Warriors coaches. So many coaches have come to the Warriors, and the only constant throughout the Warriors' existence has been changing coaches. So for me personally, to say that this coach is going to be good or this coach is bad, I've got no fucking clue. And I keep reminding myself that, but I also advise other people, because like if I see someone saying like, oh, Nathan Brown's a shit coach, or this coach it will be good, immediately I think in my head about all the coaches that have come and gone. So who knows what coach will be good for the Warriors? Like, I have no idea. We'll wait and find out. Happy days. But they've got a coach, and that's good. I will say with Nathan Brown, if I'm putting myself in his shoes, I'm thinking, okay, I did this kind of job at the Newcastle Knights, and now I can come and do a different job at the Warriors. Nathan Brown helped to rebuild the Knights and put them in a position, lay the foundations for future success. Now he's coming into a system where Stephen Kearney laid those foundations. So if I'm putting myself in Nathan Brown's shoes, it's like a new challenge. And as a professional coach, you want new challenges. You want to see what you can do. So I think it's a good opportunity for Nathan Brown to take a new step in his coaching career.
Yeah, old Brownie. He must be the first former Dragons coach to also coach the Warriors now. I remember he was coaching the Dragons when I very, very first started supporting them. So it's not a period of time I have much of a constructive memory of. Couldn't say I was like...
Nor my message is that any coach, or whether it's Nathan Brown, whatever they've done at other clubs doesn't apply to the Warriors, because, apart from maybe Craig Bellamy, we've seen it. We've seen coaches come to the Warriors and have shockers. We've seen players come to the Warriors and ruin their careers. You can't factor in historically what's happened to forecast Warriors' success,
No, that's a very fair point to make as well, because since then, since he left the Dragons, it was pre-Wayne Bennett going to the Dragons. Such an innocent time. Since then, he's gone to Super League. He's did pretty well over there. I'm pretty sure he's come back. He's been the one aspect that I think does play into this Warriors gig, and part of it is that we know he wasn't their first choice. Obviously there was or we don't know how negotiations went behind the scenes. We don't know what the actual shortlist looked like, but we do know that Todd Payton rejected the job, preferred to stay in Australia for family reasons and all that, which is all very fair enough. But yeah, Nathan Brown's, what he did with the Knights, I think, is relevant in terms of getting him to this point. It's not necessarily relevant in terms of what he does from this point on, because the thing with the thing people don't honestly, this is a thing in all sports that people don't really seem to understand, is that the way we look at players' careers, where you look at a young player and it's this guy will get better. It's within, often they're judged by their potential more than their current ability even. In fact, we were talking about that earlier, weren't we, with Freddie Adu and Michelle Wee and people like that. That's an extreme example of this thing, but people don't offer the same leeway to coaches very often. If someone comes in, their first job, they've just finished playing or whatever, and retired, they've had a year with the as an assistant with the reserve grade team or something, and then maybe a year as an assistant, and then suddenly they're thrust into the full-time gig with the top team, and maybe they struggle. And it's not often realized in the context of this is a coach who is early in their career as a coach. Yes, they're a well-known personality in the sport, perhaps, but you gotta also accept the fact that coaches are gonna learn from their mistakes, same as players. That's a thing that just needs to be kept in mind more often, I think, in a general sporting fandom sense. With Nathan Brown, I mean, he's going to be a different coach than he was 10 years ago, for example, and he will have learned many things, and sometimes that'll be for better, sometimes that might even be for worse. Chuck out old mate Jose Mourinho as an example of someone who I think is a worse coach now than he was 10 years ago. But, what he did with the Knights was he pretty much helmed one of the biggest, major squad rebuilds of the last decade of the NRL. And I think that's an interesting point, what you said about getting to do with the Warriors what he didn't get to do with the Knights, because the fact that he helped rebuild the Knights has to have been a major factor in getting him the Warriors job. But at the same time, the Warriors don't need a bottom-out rebuild. They don't need to go Philadelphia 76ers on this. They got really good players on decent enough contracts in most areas of the park. They're if they grabbed 3 major signings, maybe another half, a prop who can give you 150 meters a game, and maybe a outside back, I don't know, a center probably. At that level, if you're getting 3 international level players or origin level players, if you're getting Aussies over or something like that, the Warriors, I mean, they're already showing at the moment, at a time where they're supposedly in crisis, they're still winning games every now and then. They're competing pretty well. They're not that far off a top 8 team, and with a couple big signings, they probably would be a top 8 team. And you never know, on top of that, a couple other players, a couple of the younger guys develop at a level, Eli Katoa is a good example of someone who's going to hopefully continue to go from strength to strength. That changes the ball game completely. They're not that far away, and it's an interesting, I'm going to chuck in the old Golden State Warriors again from that book, because there's a point made in that one about how Mark Jackson was the coach to take them to a certain point. He couldn't take them beyond that point. That's when Steve Kerr came in, and suddenly they went from being these scrappy upstarts with a couple very, very interesting, like, players like, Curry and Thompson and Draymond Green, and how talented they looked. Steve Kerr comes in, changes things a little bit more and takes them to the next level where they're winning championships and all this. Like, sometimes that's what you need, is you can get a coach to take you to this point, you need someone else to take you to the next point. What's kind of fascinating about this is that, because I've been thinking about this from the context of, yes, he was a big part of that Knights rebuild. He has experience in how to get a team up to how to improve a team when they're trying to work their way up into contention. Okay, that's sweet. Like, that makes him a nice fit. But, yeah, you do make the point, like, it is, he played the Mark Jackson role at the Knights and then got booted. Stephen Koenig's already played that role at the Warriors, though, so Brownie gets to come in and be, like, the Steve Kerr this time, and gets to do, like, perhaps it's a little unfinished business, like he got a team to a point and then didn't get to take them on. Now he gets to pick up a team that is a similar point. I think the Warriors would be a little happier if they had Kalen Ponga in their team, but so it goes. Yeah, it's a funny one. The one it does also make a lot of sense for a lot of those reasons too. Like, that all does add up to a decent enough appointment. I don't think there was an outstanding candidate amongst the ones. There very often isn't mid-season, but also you don't necessarily, like, that's another thing I think you wrote about this in your thing, like, expecting the coach to come in and be the savior of the team has never worked before for the Warriors, and it wasn't going to work this time. You can't expect the coach to be the be-all and end-all. Like, a new coach is going to suddenly change things, which is also why this Phil Gould thing is interesting, right? And I'm a bit more confused about this just because I don't entirely know what his role entails. And I don't know. This gets sneaky about this, actually, and be like, okay, so, like, to sum up what Phil Gould is coming in to offer to the Warriors, I'm going to go a little bit Bill Simmons-y on you for a second here. Like, give me a pop culture character who you think would sum up what what his role is going to be for the Warriors, and, like, the capacity that whatever it is. I don't even know what the role is called. Like, would you say he's the Don Corleone coming in as the Godfather and pulling strings, or is he like bloody, the man behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz, pulling on all the levers and pretending to be the mastermind, but actually just being this dude? Or is he bloody, like, James Bond villain or something? Like, what would you say summarizes Phil Gould's role for the Warriors now?
Phil Gould's fucking Phil Gould. He's there to be Phil Gould. He's there to... He
is his own character.
He's there to do what he does best, and that is build systems and make decisions that are for the betterment of rugby league. Phil Gould's only focus is the best thing for rugby league. And I'd suggest that, like, anything the Knights are doing right now is on the basis of what Nathan Brown built, and the whole club built with Nathan Brown. A lot of what the Panthers are doing is on the basis of what Phil Gould went there to, or like went there to fix and build. You only really see the fruits of those labours years down the track. Phil Gould, to be honest, Wildcard, there are different rants and ideas I could throw out, but I want to keep this simple just to make it, like, concise and to leave people, like, just with a thought in their head. And one of those thoughts is Phil Gould was one of the best recruiters of talent from New Zealand. It was Phil Gould who established the connection with Northland Rugby League. It was Phil Gould and the Penrith Panthers recruitment manager who picked up James Fisher-Harris. They picked up Corey Harawira-Naira. They picked up Caleb Aikens. So Phil Gould is not only, you don't just look at what he built at the Penrith Panthers, and he's, like, it goes without saying, he's one of the smartest rugby league minds in the world in existence ever. People always focus on the negative, but let's just call it what he is. He's a rugby league wizard. And he built the whole academy out there. He got the whole business established there. But what Phil Gould, in relation to the Warriors and New Zealand, what Phil Gould did best was recruit talent from New Zealand to go to the Penrith Panthers. Now, the Warriors also have Peter O'Sullivan as their current recruitment manager, and he worked at the Storm and he worked at the Roosters, establishing himself as one of the best recruiters of talent from New Zealand for the Storm and the Roosters. So the way I see it, Wildcard, is you have two of the best recruiters of talent out of Aotearoa for Australian NRL clubs. They are the two dudes. They are the best because they've done it for over 15 years. They are the best at hunting the talent away from the Warriors. Now they're with the Warriors to defend that talent, to get the most out of that talent. So that is the most powerful way I can explain it. And on top of that, there's plenty of great talent already at the Warriors, like a SG Ball under 18, under 16 level. And a lot of that stuff has already been started by Peter O'Sullivan. He's already put the wheels in motion. He put the SG Ball team together. He's got a lot of players who are at first 15 schools, who are ranked among the best first 15 players in Aotearoa, who have rugby league backgrounds. Peter O'Sullivan has already got those dudes in the system, and his fingerprints already all over a lot of the Warriors' things. And you add one of the only people in the world who can match Peter O'Sullivan as far as recruiting talent away from Aotearoa, you throw him into the equation, and we have what we have. We have the concentrated, beautiful, tasty thing that is going to take the Warriors forward. So quite simply, the two best hunters of talent away from Aotearoa are now working in Aotearoa to keep that talent in Aotearoa and implement some things that are better for New Zealand Rugby League, that are better for rugby league in the Pacific Islands. Because I'd also suggest, Wildcard, over the past 5 years, I've seen and covered how rugby league is investing in the Pacific Islands. Whether it's Canberra Raiders setting up a Fiji Academy, whether it's Tonga. Tonga actually go back to the islands of Tonga. They hand to hand, face to face with their people, with their communities. They're not doing parades in New Zealand. They're not doing parades in Australia. They're doing parades in Tonga. So rugby league's presence in the Pacific Islands is increasing at the same time that rugby union's presence in the Pacific Islands, or should I say investment in the Pacific Islands, is decreasing. So now you add Phil Gould with a objective to build rugby league in New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, and low-key, I'm thinking that rugby league is going to take over the Pacific Islands. So that's another little important piece of information. I don't think it matters like what Phil Gould's job is. He's there to be Phil Gould and do what Phil Gould does best, which is put a big academy system in place to ensure that all the pipelines are flowing seamlessly, to ensure that the best players are involved in the Warriors Club, that are involved in the academies. That's what Phil Gould does best. Forget whatever happens at the NRL level. Phil Gould's talent and what makes Phil Gould is his understanding of everything that goes into an NRL club at the levels below the NRL level. That's where Phil Gould's like pure talent is. And that's all he needs to do here. But I keep going back to this idea that the two people, like literally, I can't stress this enough, the two people who did the most hunting of New Zealand's rugby league talent, their job now is to keep that talent at the Warriors and in New Zealand. And that is amazing. That is literally, this is what I feel like everything had to culminate in this point. I don't care how we got here. I don't care about all the Stephen Kern, like, shout out Stephen Kern because he did a lot of work to establish these foundations and bring good people like Peter O'Sullivan into the system. I don't care how Nathan Brown got the job. I don't care whatever else happened, because it led to this moment. It led to this moment where Phil Gould and Peter O'Sullivan, the two major hunters of talent in Aotearoa, now they're involved with the New Zealand Warriors, tasked with keeping this talent in Aotearoa. It's amazing.
So it sounds like you're pretty well in favour of the appointments then?
There's no negative. There's literally no negative to Phil Gould being involved. He's got a pretty damn good track record of doing what he does, like doing the job he's going to do. Or like, who cares what he does as a commentator? Who cares what he did as an NRL coach? That's not what he's there for at the Warriors to do. He's coming to the Warriors to set up an academy. He's coming to the Warriors to keep the best talent in New Zealand. He's coming to the Warriors to set up a link between the Pacific Islands and the Warriors. So there's a different pipeline of talent. All of that is exactly what rugby league in New Zealand needs right now.
I will say, I think, aside from the obvious, like, all the things you've just talked about, I think one sneaky little factor of Phil Gould in this role will be, like, he has an outsized personality and a big presence within the media, and he has, in past, like, been a bit critical of the Warriors, I think, which a few fans are, like, fallen back on at this point, even though I would also suggests that the reason he was critical is he could see the potential to do better, and at least, like, you also got to say, like, full credit to a fella to, like, putting the old money where the mouth is as well, and saying, well, I will do this job then, that's fine, I will take it on. I will be kind of interested just to see if there is a little bit of a, just a little bit of a change now in how the Warriors are perceived on the Australian media side of things, like whether Phil Gould is now, he's got the ears of a lot of people, and whether he can put a few whispers out there about things. And I don't know whether this will affect the way that the Warriors get covered in any way, across the old ditch. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but it's one thing I will at least, like, keep a little ear to the ground.
I would suggest that what Phil Gould's going to do, because another aspect of this was Phil Gould had started a process to be registered as a player agent, which had to be scratched for the Warriors job. So that's like Phil Gould's taking this seriously. Like, obviously it's conflict of interest, so you can't have both positions, but Phil Gould's going all in here. I would suggest that Phil Gould is going to relish being behind the scenes and implementing things behind the scenes. And the fruits of that labor will be evident. Because, like, you look at the Penrith Panthers now, I don't want to go deep into this, but I'm sure everyone involved at the Penrith Panthers and Phil Gould himself and knowledgeable rugby league people who understood what Phil Gould did at the Penrith Panthers, I'm sure those people, like, I'm sure Phil Gould is proud of the Penrith Panthers where they're at now, knowing all the work he put in to that club. And
well, he should be. They're pretty great. That's a strong, like, premiership candidate team at the moment.
I would suggest that Phil Gould is going to do everything he can to look back on this and be proud of what he achieved at the Warriors. And because, let's be honest, if Phil Gould and the Warriors have a successful next 5 years, maybe win a premiership, but successful as in Phil Gould does what he views as needing to be done, I reckon the whole rugby league landscape in this part of the world will change forever. Because if certain things are implemented and you have a rock-solid Warriors team, you've got a great academy, and you've got rugby league taking over the Pacific Islands, I would predict some amazing things for rugby league as a sport.
Yeah, we're heading into, I think we've already broken our record for longest podcast, so I won't chuck out anything, like, deeper on top of that, but I will say, like, that kind of, like, that level of work, that level of, like, puppet mastery isn't, like, that takes time. And the worry with the Warriors is just that they also have to be getting results in the short term as well in order to be able to provide that time if there is going to be a different kind of regime. The one
that's
thing...
not Phil Gould's job isn't anything NRL related. So whatever's happening with the Warriors NRL team, that doesn't reflect on Phil Gould in any way.
No, but it's like that perception versus reality thing before, and how, like, Lydia Ko was perceived. Like, Phil Gould was signed at a time, at the same time as Nathan Brown. Like, they were brought over as sort of a package deal to do different roles.
And it's Nathan Brown's job to coach the NRL team.
Yeah, sure. And it's Nathan Brown's, like, responsibility to make sure that the team is competitive in the short and midterm. But there is a perception which isn't necessarily right. They will be. I don't know. These are down the line problems anyway. But one thing that I thought Phil Gould did very well at the start of this Panthers thing was, in order to, like, buy some of that time, is they were actually, like, sneakily brilliant at signing veteran players and on, like, short-term contracts and setting a foundation that way. So at least, like, you're buying time to bring in the younger players that you know you're going to be able to find and develop and whatever. And, like, that's probably a little bit of an undercover factor of what he did at the Panthers, where now you can look at, like, some of the players that have come through and developed there and the success they're having at the moment, but they also, like, paved the road and they didn't have to bottom out to do that. Like, they had a plan the whole way through to get there. So, all factors to consider.
And also, just lastly, when Phil Gould went to the Penrith Panthers, as a, not NRL salary cap, but as a organisation, weren't in a very good financial position, business-wise. So what is also important here is that the Warriors is a very good business, and that Peter O'Sullivan, if you're a Warriors fan, you need to know who Peter O'Sullivan is, and you need to know some of the moves he's made. So Phil Gould's coming into a business setup and a group that good people involved, business is good, and then Peter O'Sullivan has already started to make moves. Moves have already been made. Things are already in motion. So Phil Gould's not coming here, just like Nathan Brown isn't coming here to start at point zero with the NRL team. Phil Gould's not coming to the Warriors to start at point zero. He's adding some bits and pieces on top as well as a wider lens with regards to rugby in New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. Like, he's coming into a good organisation. He's coming into an organisation that has already started to implement some development system things that are working, and he's going to have, I think the job's going to be pretty easy for Phil Gould, to be honest. He just does he literally just has to do what he knows how to do, and I believe a lot of good things will come from that. Rightio, wildcard. The wobbliest of Mondays. Busy morning. We'll wrap it up there. There was a quote. Do you have your mindfulness quotes there handy for you?
Oh, I could check.
Because I've got one to chuck in. I think I heard it on the way of Tao. It's my only desire is non-desire. So I'll leave that with you. What's your?
Oh, that's very Buddhist. This one says, no time to meditate, try the deep calm breathing exercise. So it's just advertising itself. The most recent quote he won was from Jack Cornfield. He says, when we get too caught up in the busyness of the world, we lose connection with one another and ourselves. Which, yeah, can't argue with that one.
Can't argue with that one at all. Kia kaha, stay beautiful, and we'll catch you next week. Cha-cha!